Response video to a Modern Mystic video on the economy, and so I think I'll go over some things real quick. I'll play some of his video, I guess that would be the way to do it. But in the end, he's just basically saying the system is, oh yes, it's kind of not perfect, but it's fine, and it's all okay, and none of this money means anything, and all the money is the same, and it's just not the truth. So I'll play some of this.
To pays because they realised that everybody was quite happy using them. A government bond is a promise to pay. A bank account is a promise to pay. A currency note is a promise to pay. And it's a promise to pay absolutely nothing at all. And we transfer.
Okay, so let's understand that he's just putting cash in the same category as bonds and putting everything in the same category because there's no gold in a vault somewhere. Alright, so let's understand again, there's only $1.2 trillion of cash money that's been printed by the government, in the sense of it's in some sort of note form as a cash liability. Some of it's in vault cash, the rest is distributed into the economy, the whole world. Across the whole world, there's only $1.2 trillion of actual money. And the rest is notes, okay, bonds and other pieces of paper people have that say something on it, this is worth $20 or whatever. But those are liabilities. So the stuff in a deposit account that says I owe you, the money in the deposit account, is a promise on the notes, the $1.2 trillion, one of those notes. Those notes have to be obtained by selling some asset to somebody who has notes, and they give you the notes. But so that's why the notes still have value, is because there's only $1.2 trillion. So where he says it's a promise of nothing, no, the federal government owns a ton of stuff. It has more than $1.2 trillion in assets. And essentially the federal government is saying the note is backed. Okay, if we have to sell something to get gold, to give you it in gold, we'll give it to you in gold. We could give it to you in wheat. We can give it to you in oil. We'll give it to you in whatever form you want. We have the assets, we have the stuff that we can sell to give you the stuff that money's worth. Now the bonds and the other stuff, again, these are also promises, but they're promises in clearly a different context. The promise backing the cash is rock solid. So that $1.2 trillion, I don't know why I said T-O there, trillion, is, I mean, that's as solid as you get. That's whatever. That's the best. Okay, I don't know. We got to come up with some other way to say that, but whatever. And the rest of this stuff has been created, okay, really in modern times. Okay, there wasn't until 1980 the national debt was almost nothing. It wasn't even $1 billion. So, well, it was like 1.2 billion or something. It was not a big number considering we had accrued that debt all the way since World War II. And it wasn't until the 80s that the debt engine started rolling. And the idea was, this is how loopy it is, and he says this is no problem, of course, right, is that you cut taxes, so you have poor man and you got rich man. Alright, so let's do it that way. So this is why there's a crisis. And what do you say to the poor man? Well, you say that we're going to have this social safety net, Social Security and stuff. And what you'll do is you'll give us actual money in advance. We'll take it out of your paycheck. So before you even get to touch it, we're going to take the money, put it in some kind of lockbox or trust fund for paying your Social Security and your expenses. What's the bargain with the rich? Well, the rich is, now let's cut your taxes so you don't have to pay taxes. And what we'll have you do instead is lend us the money. So instead of actually having the money taken from the rich, well, what do? We give them a bond, okay? So this is where bonds are created. And we pay them a premium for accepting a bond instead of them paying us cash. So instead of taxing them directly to get the money to finance government, we sell them a bond, which means we get the cash, but we only get the cash in the sense that we have to pay interest, and then we have to pay them all the money back. So they get to make a profit. They get to make an interest profit. So they get to get more money, okay, for not paying their taxes. So by creating a deficit, that is, the government had expenditures, it had an empty hole, and so the poor people have to fill their part of the hole with hard cash, and the rich people fill their part of the hole with borrowed money that we have to in the future pay interest on, and plus the premium. So they get not only to keep their money, but they get profit every year on their money. So instead of losing money every year, they get to make money every year on the tax system. So that's how ludicrous the system is at its foundation. And this guy's going to tell you that this is a sensible way to run a railroad. That you can borrow money every day of every year, pay profit to people who now you're not taxing because you cut their taxes. And so instead of having actual money you put into your fund, you just keep filling it with IOUs. Alright? And so now we've got 17 trillion or 18 trillion dollars worth of bond debt. And then now we've got $4 trillion. Oh, good. I need to buy some pens. That's what I need to do. Yeah, I really do need to do that. And we have another $4 trillion in the bank reserve accounts, which essentially is just borrowed money. We've borrowed the money in banker digits. So the banks, we told the banks, go out and buy shit with your fake money. Yes, that's fake money, the banker digits. Go buy some shit with it. Okay, and we'll just keep it on the books that we owe you the money, and we'll just put it in this reserve account, and but you don't get to spend it. Okay, you don't get to use that money. Just use the digits. We just won't hold you responsible if there's a bankruptcy or something. We'll make it okay. So it's just more borrowed. It's just another way of borrowing another $4 trillion. And ironically, what are they doing with that money they're borrowing? They're going to this rich guy, and they're buying that piece of shit bond that we sold them. Because we can't sell them on the market anymore. We have so many bonds on the market that nobody sensible would buy one of these things. On this hope that there's not going to be interest that'll erode its value. Because the real key is when are they going to have to print more of this stuff? If they go above this 1.2 trillion and they start making it 1.3 and then 1.4, and this is what this crazy person who studied the economy thinks they can do. They can go to 1.5 and 1.6 and 1.7. Every month they can incrementally increase the amount of cash in circulation, and that won't create inflation. Well, that's the most direct way you can create inflation. This number, $1.2 trillion, correlates quite exactly to the rate of inflation. So the more you increase that number, the more inflation you will have. And the problem is the government has huge liability. So now it's basically buying its own bonds off the market, paying the rich for them, of course, in more, banker digits. So they give them banker digits made out of this trust fund money to buy the bonds from them, so we can technically hold the bond. But the point is we bought it off the market because no one would buy it, meaning nobody would want it for the cheap interest we were going to pay on it. So no one's going to take it. No one wants to get 1.2% interest when inflation is easily 2 or 3%, because you're losing money every year guaranteed. And then, we haven't even gotten into the stock market, but the stock market's a whole nother, bubbled game, where that money that didn't buy the bonds, when we give them cash to buy the bonds from some guy, he takes the money and he puts it in the stock market. So most of this $4 trillion just went right into the stock market in the end, and now it's all bubbled and high. And so all the businesses have bought stock in other companies, and so they're still in business, even though they're not making any money. There's a ton of businesses that are technically bankrupt. It's just that they have holdings in other companies, and their holdings in other companies, these stocks, keep going up. So they're making enough money off their portfolio to stay in business. But as soon as the stock market stops increasing, or actually does crash, which it is going to do, they're going to be really bankrupt instead of just on paper bankrupt. And then people are going to be unemployed, and then they're not going to pay taxes, and then there's going to be more deficits. And let's also remember that we have a FDIC insurance on a bunch of garbage deposits, okay? Deposits created by accounts where the government said, here, buy this garbage and we'll FDIC insure this bad stock. So to keep the stock market up, we took a bunch of zombie stock and we basically told people, buy the zombie stock and we'll FDIC insure it, meaning that you can't lose your money. Alright, but we don't want that thing going bankrupt. We don't want to declare that stock junk because that means somebody has to actually lose some money. And we don't want any rich people to lose any money. So, yeah, buy it and we'll FDIC insure it. And so now they have maybe as much as from the estimates I've heard, $5 to $7 trillion of deposit money insured with a $20 billion fund. So if you had an insurance company that had a ratio to liabilities to assets of that dismal, you're saying, yeah, all they need is one hurricane and that insurance is out of business. How's that insurance going to pay the bill? So they don't have, so when the federal government it has to pay this insurance and it doesn't have it, people are unemployed, so revenues are going down, the stock market's going down, so they're not going to get more revenue from capital gains or any other rich man taxes, so revenues keep dropping and dropping and dropping, so they're having bigger and bigger deficits, so that means they're going to have to fire some government employees because they have no frickin' money. They're going to get more and more desperate. They can't sell the bonds without increasing the interest rate. If they increase the interest rate, then they have to pay more on the other bonds, the outstanding bonds that exist. When they come due, they'll have to reissue them at the new interest rate, which means they'll have to pay even more money in interest. So the whole thing is going to crash, and because they're going to be left with little choice but to either default on some of this debt, or they're going to have to just print the money. And as soon as they start printing the money, your money's going to turn into nothing. Alright, and everybody's going to have a flight to value. I don't know what value is going to be in the real world, just because, you know, owning property that's taxable, you know, that has a property tax on it, you probably aren't going to want to own that because all the local governments are going to be blowing the taxes way up. So there's no point in owning an extra house if you're paying, you know, if it's a $150,000 house and you're paying $10,000 in friggin' property taxes on it, you're not going to make any money that way. Yes, nothing's going to be going up, everything's going to be going down, and the whole game is going to be try to find an asset you can own, something you can own, that will go down the least. Okay, because it's all going to go down. Oil will go down because nobody has money, so nobody's going to be wanting to buy oil. No one's going to be able to afford to buy oil. Food prices can't keep going up because, yeah, we know unemployed people can't pay $10 for a bag of Cheetos, so that's not going to work. So the inflation won't be possible because the economy can't sustain inflation. It's going to shut down even more, which means more unemployment, which means more not paying the bills, which means more having to maybe print the money. And if you print the money, that's inflation, which just makes everybody poorer again. So, but this is all going down, and this delusion this guy has that this is somehow some sustainable system that's gone on for decades after decades. No, this has not been going on for a very long time. Ronald Reagan started this racket of don't pay your taxes, let us pay you a profit instead. Make the rich richer by cutting their taxes in two ways. First, they don't have to pay their taxes, and second, we sell them the IOUs, we sell them the debt that not paying their taxes created. So we lose both ways. While the poor working slob, yeah, it comes out of his paycheck, he never even sees the money, he doesn't get any interest on his money at all. The rich man gets all the interest. That's right, in that system, who's going to get rich? It ain't going to be the poor guy, he's going to get poorer, and the rich is going to get richer. And now the rich are way too rich. We don't have any real industry. The whole economy is funded based on how much trickle down the rich let trickle down. And when the stock market crashes, the rich ain't going to be rich anymore. That means nobody's going to have a job anymore. That means the whole system is going to crash, and you're either going to have hyperinflation or they're going to have to create a new currency. But those are really your only two choices. You either have hyperinflation or you just say, forget it, just write a new currency. Something like that. Well, let me play some more of this crap and we'll finish up.
These promises to pay. I buy something off you, or you go to the shops, and you've got a promise to pay in your bank account, and it's not promising to pay anything, and you transfer that promise to pay to somebody else, the store owner.
So again, he's calling all pieces of paper, all liabilities, the same. So every banknote, like again, when a bank makes a digit, the digit has the bank's name on it. Alright, it's a bank's check. So let's understand, and there's a difference between a bank that has $1 trillion in assets and a bank that has $2 trillion in liabilities. And so that's a truth in itself. But that is a claim on money, and some asset has to be sold to get the cash to pay the person the deposit money. And obviously that's when you have a run, and when everybody has to sell assets to get cash because somebody's demanding cash.
When you actually do think about it, the whole thing is senseless nonsense, but it does actually work. And
there's no proof that it does actually work. Again, that's just like they're saying the human race works, okay? It hasn't been tested very long, 10,000 years with real technology. Less than that, 1,000 years with real technology. So we haven't even tested the human race, but this whole idea that this system works when we've only been doing this for the last 30 years, 30, 40 years, hardly says it works. And certainly some of these rackets we only started 2 years ago or 3 years ago. The whole idea of putting fucking money that can never be spent in reserve accounts and bank accounts, creating fake bank digits that nobody's accountable to, and the whole idea of having FDIC insurance that's completely underfunded, those aren't ideas that we've been living on for hundreds of years or something. No, that's something they just started doing.
The reason it shouldn't work.
There's every reason it shouldn't work. It's preposterous amounts of promises that can't be paid by this single generation. The promises are so outrageously heavy that you're talking about maybe even a decade of work for every individual to pay back the money they owe the rich. The poor owe the rich 10 years of labor, technically. If you took all this debt and tried to calculate it out, it basically comes out to 10 years of labor. You can't be worked out.
Because there's no...
I mean, 10 years of labor where you don't get paid. Do you understand? 10 years of labor where you get no salary.
Better way of doing things. And you have to really then go into this really, really deeply to find any inherent problems with it.
Again, he can't find inherent problems with having people not pay taxes and be paid interest for not paying taxes. They make a profit by not paying their taxes. He doesn't see any problem with that.
And there really are none, because the government isn't promising to do anything, to pay anything.
Well, again, that's why there's only 1.2 trillion. That's the only thing that's kept the thing viable, is the fact that the government has promised. It's only made a certain amount of cash, and it hasn't allowed the printing presses to push the cash out the door. Because as soon as it does that, yes, then the whole thing crashes, because nobody's going to want anything denominated in a dollar sign. They're going to want the hard asset, and maybe the hard asset will decline in price, but it can't decline to nothing. Where if they start printing this stuff, you can start losing 50% value one year and 50% the next year and 50% the next year, and in the end, after 5 or 6 years, you will have 1 penny for every dollar you had 10 years ago.
It can't. It can't screw up, because it hasn't got any gold that it can screw up to.
Yeah, the point is it has stuff, and stuff is all the promise needs, okay? And the federal government owns stuff that's worth stuff. It owns land, it owns mines, it owns mineral resources, it owns lots of stuff that's worth real value that can be traded for any commodity you want to trade it for tomorrow. So there's no problem for it to pay $1.2 trillion in money notes. It's got that money.
All it's promising is promises, and it can never run out of promises. It can't do too many promises. The world is now firing on banks' promises.
And so he thinks that you can just keep promising your way out of this. You just put more fake money in fake accounts, and you know, he's really saying that, yeah, they should, this 4 trillion, they should make this 400 trillion. They should just keep putting money in reserve accounts, printing fake banknotes. Just tell the banks, go ahead, spend it on anything, give it to anybody. Doesn't matter what you do with it, all right? Because we're never going to pay it back. That's all he's saying, because there's no way to pay it back, ever.
The government's promises, but they're not promising to do anything or give.
They're basically promising that this is financially unsolvable. There'll be no way to collect the money to pay back these debts. So if there's ever a time when everybody wants something real, if they want real value at some point, if there's ever a run on real value, that's right, there isn't going to be any real value, because this is all promises on future labor, and you can't materialize a promise on future labor.
View anything. So they can't screw up. Nothing can be demanded out of them. It isn't as though they can over...
Again, what's going to be demanded is cash. And people are going to have to start selling assets to get cash, because people are going to say, I want the cash. I don't want the bond. I don't want the stock. I don't want some other piece of paper that just is that's based on nothing. I want something, and they're going to want cash. And if the government starts printing cash, then they're not going to want cash either. And that's going to be when things really start selling.
Do it. Because they're not promising to actually front up with anything. All they're doing is giving you something with I promise to pay on it.
Well, again, like I said, he's still saying, he's insisting that these bonds are made out of the same promise that this $1.2 trillion is. These bonds that you could print a zillion of them, especially when you're not paying any real interest rate, when you're faking the market, when you're buying your own debt. Yeah, when you're buying your own debt with borrowed money, yeah, you know, reserve numbers, yeah, that doesn't sound like you can do that and get away with that racket forever.
I promise to pay what? Absolutely nothing.
So again, he keeps saying it as if that's the truth, and that's not the truth. There isn't absolutely something at the base of all this. The problem is, though, that most of the paper cannot be turned into that value without all the bubbles being burst. You have to burst all the bubbles to transact all this stuff back into cash to give people actual value. And again, if they print the cash, then the cash won't have value either.
The system. It's not perfect, but it's marvelous.
It's not perfect, but it's marvelous. It's going to crash like, you know, well, just come up with anything, like a crash test car or something. It's going to smash into a million fucking pieces. You used to be able to buy a little toy car when I was a kid, you know, and it was all plastic, and it had this fake bumper or switch thing on it. And so, yeah, you crash it into the wall, and it would basically explode into a million little pieces.
And one day we'll go back to the government and its maintaining the accounting norms of 100 years ago, where it does fill the hole that's left.
Yeah, right, exactly, where it figures out whether there's any real value to these banknotes. That's right, all the money goes back to the Fed and it's converted into cash. Okay, and that's the accounting that's taking place. But again, as soon as there are claims from these bondholders, as soon as the bondholders run, game over.
By just spending out. It spends out and then fills the hole with taxes and selling treasuries, which it really doesn't need to do.
Right, he doesn't think you need to sell treasuries, but you just keep putting money in the reserve accounts of the banks and have the banks create more fake digits for which nobody's going to be accountable in some imaginary world where the bank will never have a liquidity problem and never need the cash, which is preposterous.
And now knowing the non-ness of the system, as in it's not held solidly anywhere at all, it's just...
Again, solid $1.2 trillion. completely consistent with the rate of inflation. If you go back to 1970, there was only $350 million or something in circulation. $1 billion. No, million. Yeah, I mean, but I'm just saying that's inflation. The inflation is almost parallel to the increase in the amount of cash in circulation. So all the inflation you've realized is really a reflection of the increase of the amount of cash printed. Cash printing creates inflation. Nothing else really does.
Oh, as long as things, you know, the accountants write the right accounting things in the right accounting places, it's wonderful. But that's the solidity of...
Again, yes, it's wonderful for the rich who get richer. It's not so good for the poor who get poorer. And it's certainly not going to work when you have no functional economy anymore, where everybody is dependent on bubble stock markets that are bubble stock markets, created by fake digits, put in fake accounts to purchase and maintain the price of. So unless you keep on funneling money into this market, fake promises, more debt notes, it can't be sustained, it can't be increased, there can't be any more profit, which means there can't be any more revenues into the government.
System, if there is anything, it is purely that the accounting has to be done properly. But
yeah, the accounting of the interest and the profit, and the, again, that the taxation is made out of. If there's no profit, there's going to be no taxation.
Accounting for absolutely nothing, just promises to pay. Promises to pay what? Nothing at all.
Again, let's point out, $1.2 trillion. You could probably pay all of the cash off by just selling Yellowstone Park. So it's really not a problem. There's a promise, there's assets to cover the $1.2 trillion in real money.
Wonderful modern system. Yeah, we'll get to that one day and really nut that out about how much lassitude that actually does give the government to let that accounting drift off and just spend the money.
See, there he goes again. Just spend the money. No, he's saying print the money. Okay, increase this 1.2 number dramatically. He thinks you can actually do that. You can put the money in reserve accounts and it'll never be spent. Well, no, it's going to get spent. The banks are going to need it. The more digits they make out of this reserve money, the more liabilities they create, and eventually somebody's going to ask for something called real money. And as soon as they ask for that real money, the bank's going to go to the reserve and say, give me the money, because I don't have any frickin' money. I have just a bunch of debt notes you gave me.
Without filling it in with taxes and selling bonds, how far could that go?
So again, when he says how far can that go, he's saying how far can you increase this $4 trillion that was spent directly to buy equities off of the stock market to increase the value of the stock market and to decrease the value of the bonds. We can't pay interest on the debt. Alright, the debt we hold is so expensive that the only way we can maintain paying the bills is to have zero interest rates. That's the only way the debt is manageable. The debt would be completely unmanageable if we were paying like some sort of real amount of a premium on our debt notes. So having a 10-year bond at 3% interest and a 5-year bond at 1.2% interest, which is almost losing money for sure, is the only way we can finance the debt. Is we have to keep lowering the interest we're paying on the debt. But obviously if you're doing it at this huge price where you're creating more debt to lower the price of debt, that can't be sustained. And it certainly will never be sustained if you ever think you're going to go back to a world where somebody actually has a savings account that pays interest, or where you have a loan system where anybody's going to be willing to lend money to people at no profit.
But you really have to understand the system first before you start panicking about that. Of course.
So no reason to panic. You just borrow some more money from rich people and pay them some more interest. No reason to panic. Just get yourself into a deeper slavery contract. Get yourself buried under more and more liability. No problem there.
No need to panic now because the accountants make sure that
I think you got to panic if the average taxpayer, the actually people who are paying taxes, the average working man, let's say, has a liability of $300,000 in debt just from his federal debt. That's not including any of his personal debt. Well, I think there's probably a reason to panic.
the system is balanced. And the banks make sure
it's balanced because we have sold yourself into slavery. $300,000 of debt. That doesn't sound like no problem.
Well, their system is balanced, and
it's balanced by fake money and fake accounts insuring fake stuff. $20 billion insuring $7 trillion in deposits. $20 billion. It's not going to take much of a run on the bank to use that up.
It's very much to do about nothing.
There you go. That's the statement. Much to do about nothing. Yeah, right. We are in a slave relationship to a tiny percentage of the human race, and it's much to do about nothing. They own 99% of the asset pie, the rest own 1% of the asset pie in realistic terms, and there's nothing to worry about.
Don't forget the San Diego dogs. Can San Diego dogs be jealous or not? Right.
Yeah, like that makes any sense at all. Why don't you just talk in hieroglyphics next? Anyway, yeah, of course dogs can be jealous. I don't even know what the point of that is. I don't have any clue what the hell you're talking about. So yes, be obscure and indirect. That'll just make your incoherent economic babble consistent with your incoherent philosophical babble. So bravo. So anyway, enough said. Doom is a-coming, buddy. You know, it's all going down, and it's going to go down ugly and hard. Yeah. And I'll say I told you so. I've been telling you so, but the point is, it doesn't really matter that I've been wrong for 10 years in a row. I'm going to eventually be right. And that's what really matters. I'm eventually going to predict the fact that the system will fail. Alright, the fact that I didn't predict which day it's going to fail doesn't really matter. I got the failure part right. Yeah, so anyway, till next time.